Okay, good evening, everyone.
It's 5:45, we're a little bit late.
Okay. Just as we begin, we have a lot going on tonight. I love when people say we got a lot going on tonight because that usually means they can't handle everything going on, but we actually can handle everything that's going on. There's just a lot going on tonight. So, as we look at it, we have a rally which is going on. It starts at 6 o'clock. And will be going on throughout these proceedings. As we know, with the rally / protest, it is not a protest of our district, but rather the funding cuts that are being made by the state. So what you will actually see during these proceedings is you may see some people from time to time walk out. For instance, and I just want to point this out not to highlight anyone, but the superintendent and the board president will walk out about 6:35. So they're going to be speaking at the rally as well. That does not mean they do not care about the budget advisory process. They are very passionate about it, so we will miss them while they are actually gone, and we promise not to make any huge...
We will?
Oh, we will, okay. Okay, never, strike that last statement.
He's speaking broadly here.
Okay, so what I actually did, and this is kind of how we did it last year as well, is after we finished the community forum. We had 2 community forums last year, we had 2 community forums this year, and for anyone who was not at this past community forum, everyone who is a board member had an email to them. Budget advisory team members, does anyone need a physical copy of the presentation?
I will take one.
I'll take one too. I would take one as well.
I'll take one too.
All right, I have them all, what I have. Sorry, board members come first.
I can share one if need be. I've already seen all this. Me and Mike can share. I can share one. Me and Mike can share. Okay.
And then you have a copy in the office too.
Oh, okay. I can run to the office.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you look at that? Did you have time for that?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
It's 10
from
a.m.
last.
Yeah, and theirs are in the office.
Okay.
I think this is the first draft.
Oh, okay, okay. So what we're actually looking at here, I'm not going to go through every slide. Really what we're actually going to look at in terms of the presentation is what is up behind me right now. And I'll just talk a little bit about what we talked about. We gave an overview from the first community forum talking about the state aid being basically suppressed since 2007-8. We talked about the gap elimination adjustment being about $7 million since its inception in 2010 for a total basically 7 and 17, so for about $24 million our district has had a shortfall. We did put, and you have in your handouts if anyone is interested, your local representatives, so if you wanted to write to them you certainly can do that. We talked about the deficit trend, and basically we will be at over a $4 million trend within 4 years, a $4 million deficit. Over the next 4 years, it is about a $10 million deficit over the next 4 years.
On top of the 24.
On top of their loss, that's correct. So on top of what we've seen as a loss from reduced state aid, foundation aid, and the gap elimination adjustment, which we've been shorted about $24 million. If we change nothing else that we are doing right now and looking at projections over the next 4 years, we'll have about a $10 million shortfall over 4 years.
That's if nothing changes.
If nothing changes. Correct. And again, we can't at this point really count necessarily on what the state's going to do for this, do for us out of their benevolence. So looking at that, how do we basically right our ship or support ourselves over the course of several years? Okay. We showed the reserves, enrollment projections were going down. Sandy went through a very detailed analysis of that. And then for the budget gap, and actually I will go back to the budget gap because I do think it's good for everyone to see. The budget gap from 2014. So I'll go back there just to let everyone see. So last year we had a budget of about $26.3 million, or it was an increase of 2.62 from the year before. Okay, tax levy only went up 1.78. And for this year, here's actually what we're looking at here. Our spending plan is $27.2 million. Our approved budget from the year before was $26.3 million, or $831,000 more, or about a 3.15% increase. Now, from that increase, we are able to raise our tax cap or revenues from the tax cap 2.21%, or roughly $294,000. That certainly doesn't take care of our entire gap that we're actually going to have. So when you take a look at the year-to-year difference, let's see, it's on the last slide, so let me go to the last slide. What we were looking at was a gap of $1.5 million. What we had put in there is using the same fund balance and reserves from last year. Whether or not we actually want to do that or not, but as a placeholder, we had to put something in the budget as to where we should take fund balance and reserves. So $1.1 million, which was an increase last year as well, so we held that flat. And looking at that, that gives us a new deficit of $437,000. Okay, so much better than where we were last year at this point in time, but still $437,000 is still a high amount to come up with. And also the board has to look and say, do you again want to use the same fund balance and reserves? You can always alter that if you wish. So looking at that, we started with, number one, changes to the budget, which weren't necessarily to make up the deficit, but like last year, we have two things when we look at the budget. Number one, if we never had a deficit, in the ideal world, and we were going to make changes from year to year because of program requirements, how do we need to reslice the pie to account for our program changes? So for example, and Sean loves when I say this, but it is a very clear example, so my apologies. If we have more students coming in with higher needs, more of the pie needs to go to that. It's just a fact of life. And the same thing with a lot of other, things. We look at all of our program for the entire year and say, how's it changing for next year? And what do we need to adjust if nothing else were to change? So this first slide that you see in here are looking at the changes, proposed budget neutral additions. This isn't because of the budget deficit at all. This whole slide really has nothing to do with budget deficit. It's just a reslicing the pie based on what our needs are going to be for next year. So looking at this, we looked at 2 classroom aides at the elementary. 1 clerk was needed. 1 0.5 special education teacher at GLP. 2 classroom aides at the GLP. 1 sander and salt truck. A guidance department chair, elementary homework club, and Model UN of refunding those last 2.
So let me just grab onto the bottom 3 here, because, or bottom 2, elementary homework club and Model UN were 2 extracurriculars which were cut last year, which we found that some we found in other places in the budget because they shouldn't have been cut. They were just really too important. So they've been funded in some cases. The high school homework club would be a good example of that as well. APEX, which is our after school Let's Get You Graduated program. So Model UN is one that was cut last year. It is back on to be, not the program, just the funding for it, but it's back on to be funded for next year, and it's about $897 to fund it. So that is one that we would recommend bringing back on. In our push with our Director of Curriculum, Kelly LaRosa, to bring our guidance department, especially 712, starting through 7th grade and 8th grade, up to a level curricularly that we want. The addition of a guidance chair in that department who sits in on the guidance chair meetings, who sees the curriculum needs, the instruction that changes, is something we feel is really important to bring that up to speed, especially with all the changes that are going on with graduation diplomas, with CTE and the 4+1.
The clerk, do we know where that clerk could be, or what it's for?
We could actually use 2 in different areas, but right now we're asking for 1, and we'll figure out where we can go with it, because everybody needs it. But with the increase in needs that we have,
I'm putting a plug in for.
No, I know you are. But everybody needs a plug. Okay, everybody needs the plug. So we have 1.4, 1.45 in our special ed. We have a half in our business office. We have a half in our facilities. We have a single secretary at GLP. We have a half for technology. We have a half for athletics. We don't have anyone just solely looking at attendance. So we, okay, so I understand. Go ahead, because people don't know what we're talking about. We're talking code.
and,
So.
The short version is, since they moved the attendance responsibility around, and because everyone else is so busy, a student could come here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and when they sign in, it may not be updated at that minute. And then a teacher could go in and check attendance, but it won't be accurate. So there are times where we don't know if a student is in the building or not. And it's because everyone's so busy. We have all the technology, but if they're not inputted and updated regularly, so if the kids should be in your room, but they're skipping, you might not be looking at something accurate, or someone could call in, and then they, of course, everyone would make the phone calls and check the classrooms, and you're gonna find them, but it has never been like that before. So there was a time.
This was a cut in 2013.
There was a time where they were so, Ann Brown was so good at what she did that she recognized a forge. No, every parent got a personal phone call home, your student isn't in the building, where are they? But my piece, and Ms. Sansalon asserted, when the student first walks in the building, if they have someone who actually has the 60 seconds to look up and acknowledge them, why are you late? What's going on in your family? The idea that we need to know why they're not in the building and track them, but also give them a message that we care that they're in the building, why they're running late, what's going on, to me is one of the most important things we do, as far as knowing if our students in the building or not. And I respectfully, everyone is very, very busy, but if we don't accurately know whether our student's in the building or not, I think we're really dropping the ball there.
Can you confirm what you're trying to say? Are you trying to say that the 1.00 is not enough?
I don't know.
No, that's not what she said.
I'm saying the clerk, I would hope, is going to do attendance.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Or somehow.
Do you know, Sandy, if they are, or what do you think?
I got people clamoring all over the place. I got Medicaid stuff that's not getting done.
So you're not, basically, you're not going to
Commit.
commit to it?
It's a
That's
beginning.
all, I'm just asking.
It's a beginning. And based on where we are with what the board feels, then I can make a decision and bring a recommendation to the board about what that should look like. I mean, honestly, I could use two, because things just don't get done.
What is the actual cost to just one clerk right now?
It's roughly about $45,000 with benefits.
So we'll say
Could you
40.
have a student possibly help out in that
We
position?
actually, it's clerical's position, so it'd be a CSE job, so you can't even have a teacher on.
It's also confidential.
Yeah,
It's not
that would be the other piece.
It's
but-
more confidential.
And in terms of the second, if we do get additional state aid back, this may be an area that we can actually look at as well.
I think the board ought to start writing a list on what's important, because I think we will get money back. And even if, I think that we should have a list of things that should be prioritized on what gets.
So right here in front of you.
Good.
This is what they
You've
are.
already got it then.
Mhm.
Great.
But it's also, we're also using what, 1.1?
Yes, correct.
We're also using 1.1 million in fund balance and reserve.
So even if we do get state aid, it's, a part of it, in my hope, would be that we put it back.
Yeah, we're taking a
Not all of it,
We've
but
got 2 more
but
years
the
at home.
point of it.
It's going to come
No,
back.
you don't know that. Look, he just got reelected. He's got 4 more years.
Oh, 4 years.
Yeah, he just got really elected last year, so he's got 4 years.
I'm not saying we put it all back, but it's,
Mike, it's music to my ears.
I just like to have a list.
And we
Right
do,
here.
we do.
Well, this
It's-
list
it
here is for proposed in the budget. This is not a list if we get more money back, is it?
No, but if you look on the next page, which we'll get to in a minute, that's how we are looking
Okay.
at closing the deficit. So if you get additional money back, we won't have to do everything on that next
Including
page.
here.
Okay? Not to jump ahead, sorry about that.
So, but if I could just jump for one moment. On the bottom of that same page, what you'll see is a reduction in one second grade teacher. That is due to enrollment. It has a budgetary effect on us, but it's due to enrollment. And the fact that we have a retirement to equal that out, we're not letting a teacher go. Okay, so there's also a recommendation for third grade. But because we have a second retirement, we're not letting a teacher go. And if you turn to the page, I'll give you the number. Enrollment, no. It looks like this. Class size K-5. You can see that even with that reduction in second and third grade, that the number of kids in the classroom really stays very stable. So second grade between 19 and 20, and third grade between 20 and 23. That's with that reduction in the teacher in second and third.
Right now, when kids come into the high school late, then do they go to the main office and they check in with those secretaries? I know when I was in high school, we did have an attendance for...
No, it's in guidance at the moment. So they go to the guidance secretary, they do report in.
So so if a kid comes into the guidance department, wouldn't that person know now that that kid's late?
Well, she's busy doing a full-time guidance job, which is what she had originally until it's been passed around because it's really that challenging. That would be the simple version. Nobody has the time to just pay attention to the attendance and thoroughly do that. It's an ongoing, all day long, keep it up to, date, so to speak, or the time. What happens in guidance, if you want the short version, any given morning you could have child protection services in there, you could have Lieutenant McCarthy in and out. Again, you have a very private, the guidance department has worked really hard at making it a safe place that students want to come with their issues. And so you could be the kid just signing in attendance and you walk into a scene, or you could be the kid who's getting called down to guidance because there's something going on. You got to walk the gauntlet of 5 kids signing in for attendance. It should be a private, safe spot where personal things can get dealt with and people could come and go. So we've had as many as 10 to 15 kids signing in at any given time, like right around, like 7:45, 5 to 8. We have people who come in late and we have people who leave early. So at any given time, you'll have that flow of 7 or 8 kids coming in or, late or leaving early.
When did it change from being in
front of middle
2013.
Okay. It should be over there.
Well, it's a discussion and respectfully.
Well, there should be a lot of other things, but is
Well,
this
no,
a priority? Look at this.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that should be, it
Nothing's
should be a
perfect.
separate thing as far as
Could we have it
attendance
in the
goes.
high
I got a
school?
call the other day, just Amanda was late because she had a doctor's appointment. So I know I got a call.
That's good
So
to know,
it
Patty.
does work.
It's
Yeah,
good to know.
it does
not
work.
the ideal.
But I knew she wasn't skipping. She
Not yet.
No, if I got it for Owen.
This is being recorded.
Sorry.
Oh, I was late all the time.
He's going to be happy with you.
He will never watch this.
Okay, so when you look on the same sheet, what you do see at the bottom where the 3 that would pay for what's up and top for just reshuffling the deck, reapportioning the pie. So 2 elementary retirements and being replaced at lower price teachers. And then with that, as Sandy had mentioned, 1 second grade teacher, and that really is due to enrollment more than anything else.
As is the science.
As is the science at .33 as well.
What grade is the science teacher in?
It's not a grade. It's, in 2013, we had a reduction of .67 of a science teacher when Keith Crombie left us, so this would be the remainder of that 1.0 FTE. It could, in this particular case, it depends on who's certified to do what, so it's not really a grade. It's just where the numbers fall.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, this is what we're looking at in terms of making up the deficit for the budget. So we already mentioned the second grade teacher to help us with the pie reapportionment, the third grade teacher, again, due to enrollment for budget reductions. Now, when you take a look at second and third grade teachers, when you get rid of an entire class at a grade level, you have related what are known as specials. So art, music, PE, technology.
Oh, thanks for explaining that. Yep, you already explained that once, but that was...
Okay, but for those who may not have been at the last meeting, that goes hat in hand with the teacher. So when you
Library.
reduce one full teacher, you would have reduced the associated specials. Okay. And then what we're looking at for additional reductions, English .33, and we heard a lot of comment at the community forum regarding that one.
Can you, that English .33, is that a budget reduction?
Yes.
Or an enrollment reduction? Are there students in the classes?
Well, let's put it this way. Parts of it are enrollment, so everything that's on here isn't strictly because of budget. We do need to make up the budget deficit without a doubt, but it's not a straight, we could really, you know, we can't afford not to go down a section or two or anything like that. So I'm going to let Sandy answer that. But that's a good point in all of it.
So in 2013, we made cuts across the board to English, science, social studies, math, some art, and along the way, art, music, library, computers. What you will start to see starting on this year is a combination between enrollment and budget. So it's going to be a combo, because as we get deeper into the problem of the budget, we just can't afford to keep offering some programs that we have. That's a given, and next year you'll see even more. The .33 in English is a combination between budget and enrollment. Could we take that .33 and offer programs? We can always offer programs at the secondary level. We can offer electives. We can offer an after-school program. We could do a 9th grade academy. We can always do that. But what I can tell you is that I cannot cut at GLP or elementary anymore. I cannot cut in clerical anymore. We're actually asking to put a couple back. I cannot take out of equipment anymore because it's falling apart. I can't take out of buses anymore because they're falling apart. So the only thing that's really left, unfortunately, for us to take a look at is staff, and that staff is in teaching. And it's not going to be at the elementary level.
Can I ask about, I understand the reasoning for the reduction in art, music, phys ed.
Yep.
The library.
Library would be there too. Computer would be there too.
We had issues last year was it last year that some of the kids weren't going to the library? So
Because Sandy Platts was the only librarian between GLP and the elementary school. So
Okay.
we now have a part-time librarian in both, one for each building.
Okay, so that's not going to be an issue.
No, it's a
with this
designated
cut.
slot to
Okay,
go to the
that was
library.
I didn't understand.
Just like art, yep.
Okay.
Whereas that was not the case last year.
Okay,
It's a good question.
yep.
We've got the Director of Transportation on there. Also associated with transportation, we have 20 hours per week in runs, so a reduction of bus drivers for that reduction of 20 hours per week. That is strictly, for bus driver and bus attendant, is strictly due to need. We don't need as much bus runs as we did previously. So the 20 hours per week and the 7.5 hours per week for the bus attendant. JV Sports, it was on there last year, it is back on there again this year. We've had a reduction, 3 reductions in special ed private placements, and we've also reduced the BOCES budget as well. And we talked about that actually when we had the discussion on the BOCES presentation of that reduction as well.
Real quick, Tom, on the
Absolutely.
the JV sports, what's the total cost savings on that?
$51,000.
And I missed that presentation. Can you just have a real short explanation?
Marissa will be here for the board
Okay.
meeting, so she's more than happy to come and give it to you at detail. She'll tell you which sports are not.
Okay.
Is it
Okay.
all JV?
No.
or-
No,
Oh.
it's not. And she's prepared to answer questions for you tonight at the board meeting if you ask.
Last year, when we were reducing it, we brought it back, giving her the year to really figure out where we can do it and where we can't do it. So I think she's had her time to do it. I
So-
don't like it, but
She's not recommending them all. There are other school districts that are doing it, whereas last year they really weren't. Right, North Collins, Springville's put it up. There's a couple of Area 1 schools that have. And then the recommendation as enrollment at the high school continues to decline will be to put together a community-based committee to take a look at program. And whether JV were to come back or not, but we're getting small enough with a cohort size of, right now between 7th and 12th grade, of between 106 and 130, but by the year 2018-19, some of our class sizes at 7th and 8th grade will be 90. And so we just won't be able to do everything that we're doing. So we will be asking for a committee to start up. And if in fact the board wanted to reduce programs and take a look at JV sports, you could also do that.
And I will make one comment with the JV sports, something I just heard today, because every school district in Erie 2 met this morning, and one of the topics was budget, how are you making up your budget shortfall, so on and so forth. And so when the topic of JV sports came up, the answer, surprisingly, that was actually given is from other districts, and Gowanda was the example I'll use. Gowanda said, we cut our JV sports a couple years ago, and we were expecting the worst of it because we're not offering as much program. She said, actually, our program as an overall whole actually went up with the combination of varsity and modified.
Push kids into those.
Right, so while it seemed counterintuitive that you can handle more kids with 2 programs rather than 3, she said, we actually did okay. So just to pass that along, and I'll if I don't mention again with Marissa, remind me and I'll let her know as well, so.
May I add one more thing with attendance?
Absolutely.
Our state aid is connected to how accurate our attendance is, right?
Yes, it is, absolutely. So we do need to make sure we get that correct. Mm-hmm.
And can you refresh me again? I know we discussed this last year. It seems like we've been discussing it for the last couple of years about sports. But why JV and not modified?
I'm going to leave that to Marissa. She can answer that better than I
I
can.
can tell you the meeting, because modified are like the feeders, no?
I think there's as well. I'm just asking a question. I mean, what's,
No, I'm going to put Marissa on that.
okay.
Right at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, just curious.
I think that has something to do with it.
I would say something and wouldn't be right. She'd look at him and say, you gave the wrong answer on that, so I might as well have her give the answer on that.
Okay, that's fine. I know we discussed it last year.
Yep.
For the attendance piece, Klopp, would it be better if it was in the high school office?
I'm not going to, if you're asking me my personal opinion,
Yeah.
I prefer it in front of where Ms. Marissa Falcaro is. She could kind of, it's a good location depending on it, where you change your entrances and all. And kind of double dutied if the nurse was at lunch or the AD. But it was just, and it wasn't, that seemed to work, but that's what I knew best. That's what worked best.
That's how it was when I
Yeah,
was.
more than anything, it's somebody who actually has the time to just pay attention to it and do it as often as it needs to get done and accurately. That's where, you know, Priscilla, years ago, there was another woman who did attendance, and Priscilla was there. So that's what I know best.
She was good.
Yeah. She taught everyone else how to read know if it's a forged note, how to call home, and you knew Priscilla. Priscilla
It's
had.
the only reason I ever got in trouble in high school, honestly, was attendance. We're not bringing it back, I swear.
The only reason, sure.
Okay, so taking a look then at the overall picture at the next slide, the appropriations versus the revenues. So where we actually stood, and this is before what we just showed in terms of making up the deficit, a budget of $27.2 million, revenues of almost $7 million, or a difference of $1.5 million. That's where we stand right now. However, as I said, in terms of closing the gap of that 1.5, we put as a placeholder at this point the $1.1 million, which is the same use of fund balance and reserves as last year, with the remaining $437 coming from those proposed cuts you saw in the previous slides. All of that, as I pointed out at the community forum, I'd say it again, by closing the gap, this does not mean that we have a balanced budget. We are still deficit spending. Anytime we're using fund balance and reserves, your savings account, you are deficit spending. So we may close the gap, and we may start the year saying, basically, we are where we need to be, but we're still deficit spending at the end of the day. So I need to point that out just because, again, people say, great, we have no deficit. We still have the deficit. It's just how we're funding the deficit. Yes?
Tom, what did you say at the end of the school year, that if we have any money left, we put it back into the reserves? What
Yes.
did we have last year?
Last year, we put $1 million into the reserves. Now, and in years past, we'd put $2.5–3 million in the reserves, because here's what happens. When we close this gap that you see right here, once we do this and we start our year with a budget of 228. As we move forward in the year, we cut off spending at a certain point in the year.
Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So for instance, our budget this year is $25.7 million. That's our budget this year. At the end of the year, you can either A, end in a deficit situation, which is illegal to do, B, end exactly at $25.7 million, or 3, you can end with a little money left over. Now, when you're looking at a $26 million budget, you're never going to be to the penny exactly $26 million. I don't care who you are. And you wouldn't want to, quite honestly, as well. So we don't want to go into the deficit situation because, again, that's illegal to end the year in a deficit. So you either have to end exactly on the penny or with money left over. And for us, the two alternatives, we'd rather have some left over because as we're using reserves, we want to put some back in. You know, maybe not as much as we took out, but we want to put some back in so our reserves don't keep going like this, but they're more steady.
So we took how much out of our reserves last year?
1.1.
And we put how much back in?
$1 million. So we put in less than what we took out.
Where do we actually put that million?
We broke it out between the capital reserve, the employee, the ERS, the retirement system reserve, and a little into unemployment, but the bulk of it went into the ERS and also the capital reserve. And I would also say, moving forward, if the project moves forward, and let's just go with the assumption that it is, or whether it does now, later, whatever, our capital reserve right now is just under $1 million. And my conservative approach is saying our capital reserve right now for a capital project is paltry. Easy 2.5. And that capital reserve also is money we have set aside for buses as well, of which we'd be taking out money this year for buses. So if we're going to take out about $450,000 of that reserve right now for buses, that leaves us about $500,000 in the capital reserve.
So can you talk a little bit about why it should be there when you start to talk about
why the reserve should be there?
Why the zero tax impact?
Well, in a nutshell, you just answered the question. What you want to try and do is minimize the tax impact to voters. Not necessarily voters, but all residents who pay taxes. So not just for the vote, but for the life of the capital project. So if you have money built up in your savings account specifically for a capital reserve, and you can use it for the capital reserve, the overall remaining cost is less, which means there's less that the taxpayers would have to actually pay. And what we try to do, and I would, as I said, be cautious, is one of the things they look at is what is a tax neutral project? Meaning something that will not cost taxpayers one single dime if you were going to run the capital project. And they run those calculations, and some districts say this will be a tax neutral project. It won't cost you a dime. I will tell you, almost every district that does that finds themselves not in a great spot of saying this has zero tax impact. I personally have said to both the architect and the construction manager, I'm not comfortable saying this will cost taxpayers zero. I'm comfortable saying we'll try and do the best we can to minimize impact, but for us to promise zero impact, and when there is an impact, those taxpayers will be back here saying, you promised us it was zero. I don't want to put us in that position of having to defend why it even cost $10 when we said it'd be zero. And it happens, trust me. So what we try to do is put as much in savings as possible, reasonably. And when the time comes for a capital project, your capital market advisors who we work with, they will run the numbers to say, here's as much as what you're looking at for as low an impact as possible. Does that answer your question? PTA? Okay, so what we've had since this presentation on Saturday is PTA. And PTA is finding themselves with less in their savings accounts than they would like. So what they're actually finding now is they fund field trips for us at all three levels. Not just field trips, but I mean other funding for the school as well. But I'm really looking at field trips in terms of what I'm actually talking about here. So each of the three buildings relies on PTA funding in order to run field trips. And there's a budget each year. Okay. So for GLP, right, it's not just field trips, but assemblies, build-a-book night, character reading nights, field days, so it's more than just field trip. So right now, GLP has $10,655 in expenses that PTA pays for this year. For the elementary school, they have $12,646, and for the junior, senior high school, they have $8,835 in expenses that PTA funds, roughly about $30,000. Now, what PTA is saying is, it's not that we're not going to fund that. We're going to run fundraisers, and if all goes well, we still won't have a problem funding that. If all does not go well, we won't be able to fund the full amount. So when I take a look at that from a district standpoint, we have $30,000 worth of programs and field trips that we run for kids that if we don't think of some alternative, may not happen. So looking at a conservative estimate, what we're talking about at this point, and it's still brand new as we're looking at this, is to say maybe only 25% of the PTA funding comes in. More likely than not, more will come in. But from a conservative standpoint, you know they're going to come up with something. Even if all their fundraisers don't go as planned, they're still going to raise some money. So it's never going to be zero. I don't think it'll be 100%, but if you say conservatively, 25% would come in, and the district would either have to make a choice what to do. Do you cut the rest of it, or do you fund it elsewhere? So that is brand new on the table as well. So, yep, actually it just came up during this week, so it's after.
If you just look at the enrollment, there's that much less kids to draw from fundraisers.
And everybody's fundraising.
And everybody's fundraising.
Everybody's fundraising.
Well, it's usually the little kids too that do a lot of
Selling
it.
mattresses.
So looking at this, I said it on Saturday as well, and it really was not meant to sound callous, and I said that before I made the statement. We're in a much better position this year than we were last year. However, if you are any portion of those cuts, it's not a great place for you to be in. So when I say we're at a better spot this year than we were last year at this time, I mean that. But again, I know it's not simple when you're looking at $437,000. Even if you're $5 worth of that cut, it's still affecting you. So we do realize, and we don't take it lightly, and I know no one at this table does, but I actually like to point that out every time because these are not easy cuts at $437,000.
But, so then I guess, once we figure out where we're getting, or what we're receiving back from the state, these additional reductions, this list is not going to be here, the same list. That's my intention.
There are a couple options of which you actually have before you. You can take away from the reductions. You can use less in reserves. Or you can do other programs, like for instance, we hadn't planned on PTA. So a portion of that would go for that, and any other programs that we really wanted to do and just were not even a possibility because there's no way we could have afforded them, so everyone said their pie in the sky dreams were not even to be discussed.
Okay.
So there's three different things
So
you can actually
PTA
do.
is roughly 24,000 then? we're
Roughly,
looking?
yeah.
Okay.
And if, once you present the budget, if you get the money, more money back, then is there a process, or is it just?
Because
It would be the board.
That's what I thought.
it is a process. Yeah, let me tell you how the process actually works. What the board actually adopts and puts forth to the public is that spending number. So this number that you're seeing up there, the 27,228. So right now, that 27,228 technically will go down $437,000 in cuts. That number, I mean, and we can look at one or two ways. We can leave that number the same and hope for more revenues. We could lower that number by the 437, we could lower the number by half, but at the end, what's adopted by the voters is that bottom line number. So whatever we come up with as the bottom line number, and right now it's 27,228, that's what goes before the voters. And it doesn't matter how you change it within certain parameters. I mean, there's certain legal things you can't do. It doesn't matter if you move it from line A to line B. So you can make the changes even on May 20th after the budget's adopted, because what the voters vote on is that number.
Would it
Correct.
Would it be up to the school board, if there is more money, then the school board would decide to revisit these reductions and decide where the money would go if there's more money?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And so what do you actually think is the dollar amount that you would suspect that we would get back?
Oh,
And you're very conservative, so I'm going to...
okay, so last year, we got back $229,000 from the GEA restoration. Our increases in state aid per year over the last couple of years has averaged out to be $20,000. So personally, where would I rather see the money? put back in state aid or put in GEA. Personally, I'd rather see it in GEA. We got more restored in GEA. So the max, I think, the max we would see is 229. More likely, maybe about 100,000. That's more realistic to say. Hopefully, we'll see about another 100,000. If we see 229, like we did last year, that'd be wonderful.
100,000.
Well, and will that help any of this out?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So you'll go from $437,000 deficit to $337,000 deficit. So we would take a look at, basically prioritize and say what would be restored first.
All right, so I'm going to say we're going to get back about 160.
Yeah, Michael.
I say, I'm going to say we're going to get back about 160.
He took my conservative estimate and said he's always conservative and push him up a little more.
Jacked it up 50.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do think a piece, though, that cannot get more emphasis, too much emphasis, if you go to the tax levy cap, is this 2.21. Because people will be asked, why are you over 2%?
And my answer, since the day I started here, since, the day I end as a business official, as long as this is around 2%, is not 2%. It has been a very well-publicized PR campaign by state government to say we're implementing a 2% cap. I showed it at the previous community forum. It was about a 7-page slide showing the formula the state gives us to calculate your cap. And that cap is really predetermined by your exclusions. So you start out at either 2% or consumer price index, whichever is less. Then the governor has said, we'll allow you certain exclusions. So if the retirement system goes up more than 2%, the overage over 2% can be excluded. Pilots, payment in lieu of taxes from last year and for the coming year, if we got any, we don't get any, can be excluded. Capital project exclusions can be excluded. So all of that affects that cap. So you will never see 2% actually be 2. So last year we were at 1.78. This year we're at 2.21. I've seen other districts where no other changes. Last year they were at about 1.34 and this year they're at about 3.6. And it really is all driven by that formula. So some years you're going to be under 2, some years you're going to be over 2.
At another time, they used to break it down to, like, if you owned a home that was about $100,000, that this year would cost you so many more dollars.
And we will do that when we get to the tax rate, which we set later in the year. We actually go through and we show a couple examples of what the taxes would actually be going up.
Because sometimes that's easier to
Yep.
talk to people about.
Absolutely, and when we get to the tax rate, we haven't set the tax rate yet, and before you set the tax rate, which is how much you pay per thousand of assessed value, before you have that number to really show the example of what your taxes would be going up is really kind of a moot point because you don't have the right tax rate. So if you pay $40 per every thousand versus $38, it has a big impact on your taxes. So in the summer, we start getting in from all the towns as to what the assessed values are. Once we get all that information, then we can figure out the tax rate, and then we actually do this during the summer, show a couple examples for different price
So we
homes.
won't have it before the May budget to pitch?
No, because we will not have the tax rate before then. We will not know our assessed value for next year before the summer. What we've done in the past and what we did with the veterans exemption, we did show some examples based on this year's tax rate. So to go up before the voters now and to say your taxes next year will go up $50 or $70 would be very misleading because you would be using this year's tax rate. I would not want to do that.
You can also just say it's 2% and we're talking about Cuomo. And all you have to do is just
Right.
say,
And some people have said that too, and that's
say
a
it's
simple
2%,
answer.
But
Yep.
it's coming from Cuomo, so.
The other example, the other thing to keep in mind, when it says 2.21, that's for the district as a whole. That's for the tax levy for the district as a whole. So your taxes might go up 1.78, your taxes might go up 2.72, your taxes might go up 3%. It's going to change as well. Make sense?
Don't like it, but makes sense.
No one likes this. No one likes having a deficit, that's for sure.
No one likes to have taxes.
Okay. Any other questions on the budget presentation? Okay.
I wasn't able to make it on the weekend. How was the community feedback?
I would say, as a whole, I really think the community was very supportive. One of the largest things that you heard from the community, quite honestly, was that .33 English cut. That was very loud and very clear that people didn't like that. Some of the other things, no one even said a word about. Anyone remember any other real main talking points from Saturday? That was the loudest. That was by far the loudest. Brenda, anything else come to your mind, really? That was the biggest one.
That was the biggest question. They wanted to know if it was a budget cut or an enrollment cut.
Yep.
And Mrs. Lockwood, no, the attendance, she's just showing how important that is.
Right. Okay.
Even sports, honestly,
So
didn't
when you
even,
mentioned JV, no one?
not one comment on sports,
No,
nothing.
Because they've talked to other people and it's,
Yeah,
other
Jack walked
districts
out.
it's been happening to, and if Marissa has a plan, they're fine.
Yep.
I mean, they're nervous, yes, but if there's a plan, it is, everybody knows that there's
Right.
There's
And
issues.
really, we have to just face the facts, there's half the kids.
exactly.
You can't make the teams half the
And
time.
That's right, if you don't have
The
enough
buil-
players. We ran in
Yeah.
that
The
this year.
buildings that I work with, we've been going through this for years now, so we're desensitized, and it sounds bad, but, I mean, we lost Mary Ellen Bossard, so everybody's used to, like, it stinks, but you move on, you just, it is what it is. If there's not kids to teach, you can't make them up. You can't teach to an empty classroom.
Right.
It is what it is.
Como.
Well, and the other thing, well, I mean, we have a few minutes anyway, I keep, as they're talking outside, I've said this in the past. When you take a look at what our deficit is this year, the 2.7, 2.4 of that is from the state funding deficit as a whole.
So we
Right
wouldn't
there.
be in bad shape at all without the,
No, not at all. And that has been the case for the past several years. If we do not, if we didn't have a state deficit, we would be just fine. We wouldn't even be talking right now.
well, the state deficit doesn't exist. He's got a balanced budget.
got a
He's just
He
keep,
does.
he's just keeping the money. And it's not even his money, it's our tax dollars.
He's not keeping it, he's buying something like that.
There was,
Yeah, weather stationed.
in Albany last week, there was
Sensors.
a day to talk
I
to your
was gonna say.
representative. But last week, representatives spoke to school board officials, business officials, and other constituent groups. And what was reported to us today was, when we talked about our deficits for schools, an elected official said, well, you just don't understand budgets. We have to balance our budget every year. We can't have a deficit budget. And the business official very nicely said to him, actually, thank you. We appreciate that. We do understand it because we have to live with the exact same rules you do, and we have to balance our budget. You do it by taking away from us. We have to do it by taking away elsewhere.
Where
So,
was this at, Tom?
in Albany. So that was,
They actually said that?
yeah. So,
You have to do it by ruining a child's education. They have to do it by
And/or
just taking it
increasing
from.
taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, given that we have a couple minutes, I mean, you know, there's certain districts that are in more financial dire straits than we are, and some are
Absolutely.
close to us,
yes.
and some are probably further away, but I mean, I think you mentioned before, and it's my belief as well, that, you know, he's pushing districts to consolidate. That's one of the stated goals, pretty much, that, you know, there's too many school districts in New York State. Have we seen
Yes.
a merger of districts lately? I mean, I know the 4 districts in Cheektowaga looked at it.
Right.
2 of them backed out, and 2 of them look to still do it. I don't know if that's still the case, and I know...
Of all, and Tom Caruso, who's joined us, may even have a better idea than I do, but at least from what I've heard with mergers attempts, most of them fail. And the reason why, and I'll ask you in 1 second, the reason why is because primarily the district who needs it more, that could benefit more, primarily has their communities have voted them down because they're usually the smaller of the 2 districts, and there is such a community identity and the fear of losing that community identity for the most. I don't even know of one that successfully went through. You might know one or two that went through, but most attempts have failed.
You know, I want to throw this in the pile. When I first joined on the school board, I was at Rochester doing some of my paperwork. There was a gal there from the School of Wyoming. She was the superintendent, she was the financial director, she was the bus person. They had 200 kids in that school, and those parents would not join with Pavilion or Morristown.
Well, you got that in Forestville. You've got even less than that.
They will not budge. They
Yeah,
will not leave
you've
the
got-
school. It's like, it's really,
Yep.
and so what Como's really up against is these people don't want to.
Collins, what, less than 500 kids now? I mean, I was talking to a student this weekend, he's got less than 7 kids in his class.
That's
Really?
a great place to go to school.
Yeah.
I was gonna say. that'd be a
And, I
good
mean,
place to go
it's
to
great,
school.
but I mean, I don't know how long the taxpayers can keep.
Well, I was going to say, if your tax rate keeps rising, there's going to come a point where they're not going to be able to afford to
Let me
do
share this.
that.
When we were looking at the superintendent's salary, you know, we were given the sheet. Well, I took it a little step and went outside the box.
Barb, really? I'm shocked.
I did, and guess what I found out? I found out that the superintendent that was on that sheet, the top guy that had 10,000 kids in his school, made the least amount per head.
Oh, that's
He made
interesting. Okay.
$29.
So he basically divided the amount of kids by the
$29
salary.
a head.
Yep.
And the superintendent that had the least amount of kids, 400, Clymer, I think was 400 or 450, made $330
Per head.
But I do know for a fact, like I said, I talked to Wyoming, I do know for a fact that those superintendents that are making more per head are doing more jobs.
Well-
More diversified.
Probably that one that had the $39 probably had a couple assistant superintendents working
Exactly.
under him too, and it wasn't
Exactly.
directly
Yes, he has five.
involved
It was
as,
Williamsville.
Yeah.
yeah, and they have quite a bit of administration underneath them that,
But it's kind of funny to,
Because really what you're going to see from the really large districts is administrative efficiency due to size. The smaller you get, I mean, if you still keep the same number of people administratively, basically you're going to be less efficient. So, I mean, they have 5 assistant superintendents, now 4, or they had 5, now they have 4. But still, administratively, they're more efficient than a Clymer.
So what are districts like Frontier, who had to take $2 million out of the budget, operating budget this year, has no reserves at all? They're gonna be in a deficit mode again this year
Correct.
for the new budget. You know, they're gonna have to make a lot of cuts and/or raise taxes, or if the vote goes down, I mean, what happens if the state has to step in?
Well,
I mean, it might be a little early, but I don't.
It's a little early.
Getting a little
look at
better.
Niagara Wheatfield. Niagara Wheatfield's a great example. Niagara Wheatfield went through this probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And they found, actually, they were doing something they really shouldn't have been doing. Remember when I told you you can't end the year in a deficit situation? You have to end with a balanced budget. They weren't ending with a balanced budget. They were borrowing money to sustain themselves, to float them through between the 2 years. That's not legal. So it caught up with them, and what they found is the state didn't actually step in and take over. What they did is they basically sanctioned them, if you want to call it that, and said, we'll give you time to write your house. Now, what I think you're going to actually find, and they're still digging out from that, by the way, but I think what you're actually going to find is if Cuomo is looking to reduce the number of districts as a whole, and I don't think there's a great shock in that now, we said this enough, that if that's part of his plan, I think what you're actually going to see is, I don't think in the next, 1 to 3 years, you're going to see districts folding yet. I think what, in my opinion, and this is very Machiavellian in my thought process, what he's up to, is wait a couple more years. Wait till more districts get past that point of no return. And then once you get not 5, 10, 20 districts that can't afford it, but once you get 100 districts that can't afford it, then he's going to lay the hammer down and say, now I've got enough that I've got a mess that I can say, you guys are out of business, and you're done. It doesn't have the same impact if there's only 2 or 3 districts that he could fold right now. But if you wait, and everyone keeps doing what they're doing, and they don't protect themselves, and just every year get a little bit more behind, at some point, he's gonna be able to step in and say, okay, now I've got 100, 200, you're done.
so then he's going to continue to finance like the Frontiers for?
Or maybe in the short run before, in my opinion, if he's waiting for that tipping point to happen, sure, he'll fund for another year or two because it's a numbers game. So why not fund him for 1 more year or 2 more years? Why not?
But what they're doing is, we've been involved with several merger studies and supported them. We've had clients that have tried to merge. We've had Wellsville and Sile. Okay, too. Wellsville is more of a haves and Sile's Sile's a 400 student school district, which you were talking about with Wyoming. And they went through a whole study. They went out. It went down in flames. Wellsville, who was going to take on most of their debt, totally supported it. The small district was afraid of, just what you were saying, was afraid of losing the logo on their basketball court.
Yep.
And so we face that across New York State. What is happening, we just went through it with Canton and Potsdam up in the North Country.
Yeah.
2 very good size. They were Class B and Class C schools. I mean, they weren't too small. Could have been a very nice merged 3,000 student school district. Went down in flames in both districts.
So Tom, you haven't seen any of them be successful, is that correct?
We haven't seen one be successful since there's one next to Utica. It is now going to be called, forgive me, Herkimer Valley.
Did they merge?
They merged. There's 2 districts.
That was the
That one's
discussion.
been going for a long time.
There was one that very much hit on it. It happened about a year ago. That they were the
been-
model for upstate.
They were trying 3 and 4 years ago.
Yes,
I think you were
yes.
trying 3 school districts and 1 pulled out and 2 merged.
That could very well have been
It
what it
failed a
was.
couple years ago, and now it's
There's
successful.
one down by
That's it.
Allegheny
On
State
Sullivant
Park.
Valley? No, that's not Sullivant.
I don't know, but
forgot what
it was Herkimer.
But what is happening, how the districts are avoiding staying alive, is they're cutting programs down to nothing. It is, there's no magic to it. They're taking foreign languages, they're down to none. That is, before a district, they would have a 2-person teaching staff that would handle it. They're down to 1 or down to 0. The libraries are run by faculty. They get down to where it's very dysfunctional, where you almost don't want your student in there. It's not a real good situation when you get somebody that is on the real backside and have used up all their reserves. He's not coming up with any more of the GEA. Okay, that's done, and so there's going to be districts that are going to fail. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
I agree.
They can't afford to maintain the programs they have.
How's Hollow doing? I know Hollow's doing.
They're sticking around. Yeah, they've had some major issues. I wondered the exact same question. I don't know that answer.
They've gotten a few grants and stuff like that too. And then they're getting the community really heavily involved out there. Did you
Yeah,
mention anything about the gap elimination and the possibility of the sunset clause being removed?
It doesn't look like it's going to be removed this year. We might get money back. Again, because with the governor not releasing the aid runs, I think the most districts are hoping for is we get some of it back. Not that it'll just be gone.
What about the tax cap too? I read something about that and heard from a couple other superintendents that sunsetter clause is being removed and that's going to be a permanent fixture.
Correct, and that is. And that really, which portion are you talking about, the 6%?
No, the 2%.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that could be. I've heard talk of that as well. I would not want to hold my breath on that yet, quite honestly, because I just...
Sunsetting as it going away or sunsetting?
No, that it's going to stay, that they're pulling that off the legislation. I understand there is legislation on the floor right now to make the 2% or the sliding 2% permanent.
Yeah. That is what I've heard.
Sliding 2%.
Kind of like the toll roads are going away on the 90.
Yeah. It's only for now, yes.
Well, they're going to move it at least, right?
Are they going to finally move the tolls?
I read an article on that not too long ago too, that they
I wish they would move the Hamburg
Yeah.
one.
Okay.
Or the Lackawanna
Okay.
out past like Eaton.
And we're going to break down for the other meeting. Is there anyone who had any last comment before we break down? Okay.